Have you ever sat down and compared the different types of anime MCs? Whether that be the stoic hero who's a loner, or the goofy prodigy who looks to protect everything, or even the vengefully played character consumed by hatred. And the one thing they all have in common is they almost never miss. But there is one particular MC that is the worst kind, and that is the underpowered protagonist. Not to say that there aren't cases where these characters haven't flourished, but 9 times out of 10, they never work. They're always placed in a world where they have to come up with the most bizarre ways to overcome challenges. So let's go over some cases where the underpowered MC does not work. Starting with the best example being Takemichi from Tokyo Revengers. From the very beginning of the show, Takemichi was a weak character who couldn't fight in a world where fighting was everything. His one ability that gave him a slight edge was his time traveling. And with this ability, the average person would use this worse than he did. They'd maybe go back and become famous or predict stocks, just about anything for their own personal gain. But with Takemichi, he chose to save a childhood friend, and immediately I'm drawing a connection between Erased and Tokyo Revengers. The similarities is honestly what kept me watching. Also, I thought the MC is in a gang and it adds more elements to the action that Erased lacked. And it did, but just not for Takemichi. During his first encounters, it was clear as day that he was severely underpowered and lacked any fighting skills. And that would have been fine if not for Mikey, the overpowered side character. Simply because when you have a main character who is underpowered, it's easy for the fans to cling onto another character and cause the story to feel empty without him. For instance, with Gojo being so strong and becoming a fan favorite, Gege Akutami felt as if the story could not progress with him being present. So he wrote him off, causing fans to wait in anticipation for his grand return, every week constantly asking as the chapters came in. Mikey had a similar effect, because Takemichi was borderline useless in a fight. It was always up to someone else in Toman to win, specifically the invincible Mikey. It got so bad that I knew once they fought, there was no hope of them winning unless Mikey was present. And that shouldn't be the case. Mikey didn't have any special powers, but Takemichi did. Yet it always felt like he was always a side character in his own show. Time and time again, we just witnessed him take a beat down, and there was never a shred of hope he'd win a fight. It just never happened for him. He never trained or got stronger. He just stayed exactly the same. And that's what makes this character the worst type. It's not about starting out weak or underpowered, because characters like Deku and Asta had the odds stacked way against them, but they constantly trained to get stronger. Starting out weak is actually one of my favorite traits in a character, because the training arcs always make the losses they took way more worth it. But Takemichi has remained stagnant, causing a repetitive nature in the show. And I think the last straw I had with him was his fight with Taiju. He fought relentlessly for what felt like hours, just for Mikey to one-shot him. And that's when I figured out that he would never get stronger. And this is what makes these characters so bad. The potential and power to be the best, but never understanding or utilizing it to the fullest. But what I will say for Tokyo Revengers is that his character is supposed to be weak, just to kind of show that the true strength doesn't come from being the strongest, but the bravest. And as great as a message that is, I just don't see the value in it. Another great example of an underpowered protagonist is Yuki from Future Diary. Yuki spent way too much time relying on Yuno to protect him. In the beginning, he was a hesitant and anxious character who hardly used his diary because he relied on Yuno for her physical and strategic aspects in battle. He was far too passive and lacked the independence to make tough decisions. But I think the worst part about him being underpowered is him having a great ability. It's not about how your ability works, it's about how you use it. Take Lemillion from My Hero for example. He took a mediocre ability and became really strong to the point where he's even the top hero. Yuki waited basically until the end of the show to utilize his abilities fully, and by then it just didn't even make sense, because he had all these opportunities to end the game and go home, but chose to be naive. And the only reason he's not worse than Takemichi is because he eventually redeemed himself slightly towards the end. But they're basically the same character, relying on other strengths to help their weaknesses. And for some reason, these underpowered characters are always in love or have a love interest. Takemichi's whole goal was to save his first love, Hina, and Yuki and Yuno ended up fighting towards the end just to get married. Is romance really the true common denominator in these character types? Probably not, but it's just some food for thought. A controversial pick that made this list is Subaru from ReZero. Subaru's underpowered nature really does scream annoying, and for many reasons. For one, he often overestimates his ability to handle situations, even though he has zero skills to back it up. He just jumps into danger without a clear plan, praying and relying on sheer luck, which often backfires more times than not. And because of his lack of power, Subaru frequently makes himself overwhelmed by the high-stakes situations he puts himself in. He'll lash out, break down into tears, or just outright complain about the struggles he's going through, which portrays him as a whiny or dramatic character. It's also just his arrogance that really puts him over the edge, because like the other characters, he has a love interest who he believes he can save, and it's just highly unlikely expectations he puts on himself. And that just makes him rely on others like Rem and Roswell, just highlighting his lack of power. And while all these traits may sound worse than the other two, Subaru gets the edge of being the best of the three because he's the most relatable. I can admit that although he had a great ability that resets time, and he should have never made the same mistakes twice, I probably would have too. Some of the misjudgments sounded great in theory, but just didn't pan out the way he planned. It was just a dwelling on his pains and suffering I couldn't stand. He always acted as if he was the only one struggling and showcased the self-centered side that the typical underpowered MC didn't have, also making him the most unique of the three. And the most common traits with these character types is obviously love interest, suffering, and a special ability that is used in the least productive way. Because they've all had great abilities, it makes it hard to just defend them for being weak. The underpowered MC highlights human struggle and vulnerability, but this archetype can also bring out the worst in people. The reliance on others, repeated mistakes, and emotional connections can turn a compelling narrative into a repetitive and frustrating experience for the viewers. Now, while the main goal of these characters are to inspire through perseverance and growth, their lack of innate strength can make them feel like a dead weight in their own stories. Senku was a great example of a character who can use their strengths to overcome their weaknesses. While he lacks physical strength and his survival skills in a world where brute strength is obviously paramount, Senku leverages his intellect, resourcefulness, and the ability to use others to compensate for his shortcomings. By using his intellect, Senku creates a team that complements his skills, and his determination to revive civilization with science proves that raw power isn't the only path to victory. Intelligence, collaboration, and vision can lead to triumph even in the harshest of conditions. Senku shows us that weaknesses don't define us, it's how we use our strengths to rise above them. The same thing can be said with Naofumi from the Rising of Shield Hero. He's a perfect example of a character who can turn his perceived weaknesses into his greatest strengths. He started as a shield hero and he was ridiculed for having a useless power simply because it didn't have any offensive ability. But that didn't stop him at all. He used his intelligence, resourcefulness, and sheer willpower to build a team that compensated for those attack abilities. By crafting, strategizing, and strengthening his defensive abilities, he not only survives, but he becomes a true leader and shows that your shortcomings don't define exactly who you are in the end. So whether you love or hate this trope really depends on how well the story balances between these weaknesses, and it runs the risk of MCs becoming a symbol of stagnation rather than inspiration.